What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Unqualified Independent News Podcast, where today we are talking about Senate Bill 140 from New Mexico, which essentially allows tuition free college to New Mexico students. A really big bill that just got passed. I know Joe Biden, in his presidency, one of the things he's always advocated for is lowering the cost of college, and this is a huge step to doing that. The governor of New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham, I believe, signed this bill on Friday into law. It's officially titled the Opportunity Scholarship Act, which makes college tuition free for most New Mexican citizens, and it is now the most wide-reaching tuition-free scholarship program in the United States. Just in case you don't know us, my name's Corey. That's my partner Wyatt. We are very unqualified.
That's right. One of the cool things about this bill, is the opportunities that this is going to create. As we all know, education is one of the priorities from the government, and has been for a long time. And so, the more educated that you can get people, the better it is, in my opinion. Um, when we look at what this is doing, I mean, this is by far groundbreaking stuff when we're talking about here in the United States. I believe this is the first state to pass any kind of legislature that is this organized like this, for college students to help. As we also know, um, college debt is a huge issue here in America. There is so much debt that is tied up in student loans that goes back to the government. So this is going to help a lot to alleviate with some of those things, and also, for those who aren't able to typically or access college, they're going to now be able to go and further their education and get themselves, that higher education, get them higher paid jobs, and we're going to have a more well-rounded, educated workforce. So, it's a lot of benefits here.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we need to start with when we talk about this bill is that this isn't a scholarship just being given out to anyone. And I think it's important to note that this is a scholarship. It's not saying that anyone in New Mexico can go to college for free. The U.S. isn't quite there yet. Some countries around the world are, Germany being one of them, a lot of them in Europe. Um, but this is a scholarship bill in New Mexico, and it's only right now available to New Mexico citizens. And the rules get a bit tricky with the native people, the native Americans in New Mexico. Some of them have land that reach into places like Arizona, but are still allowed to apply for this scholarship. But some of the conditions that have to be met for this is coming strictly from the bill itself. You can't the whoever gets this scholarship cannot already have a bachelorate degree at the time that the scholarship is awarded. You have to be taking 6 credits a semester and no more than 18 credits per semester, which I think is kind of interesting that they're not allowing students to fast track it. I know personally 18 credits is a lot of credits, so I can't imagine 21 credits would be something these students would really want to do. So I think that's actually a fairly smart condition that has to be met. These students on a 4.0 scale need to maintain an average GPA of 2.5. But I think what's really interesting here is it's a scholarship that also goes through the summer. I think that's something that's pretty rare with scholarships. It's a 1 semester scholarship that can be renewed at the end of every semester, assuming you still meet all of the conditions. But it also goes into the summer, where if a student's in no less than 3 and no more than 9 credit hours, they can continue taking those classes for free, which is something I think is really interesting. But I kind of want to get here to one of the parts here. It talks about secondary education, and I think I want to get your point on how important is secondary education. Is it something that we maybe really should be striving for?
Well, I think secondary education is really important. In Here in America, it's the only way, really, in my opinion, to achieve some of the coveted jobs, for sure, doctors, lawyers, things like that. But also, it opens up a lot of opportunities for you. Even if you get a degree and you aren't using that degree on a day-to-day basis, the pay difference that you see between the high school diploma and a bachelor's degree, or even for that matter, like an associate's degree, um, the the pay increase is significant. And when we talk about trying to help the economy and things like that, part of that is having a well-educated workforce who is earning a lot, because when you earn more, you're able to spend more and put that money back into the economy. I also just think education in general is a benefit. The more educated that people are, the better. A lot of terrible, terrible, terrible things have happened in history, simply because people weren't educated about it, and I think that's one of uh, the the huge benefits here in America with our democratic system is the access to information and the ability to learn and to go to school, so we don't fall into authoritarian style governments, and we're not committing genocide and things like that. um, you know Heavy topics, but it all ties back into this educational system. um, and I think the more education, the better. You can't really go wrong with it in many ways.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I kind of agree with you, but I want to go back to what you said here at the beginning about the pay gap when somebody earns an associate or bachelor's degree. And I think there is a clear pay gap between the bottom percentage of earners with a degree and the top percentage of earners without a degree. I think that's where we need to be looking. I think obviously those top percentage of earners without a degrees are your unicorns, if you're well, people who didn't make it to college but went off to have extremely successful lives. And I think this is well documented. Um, but how do we close the gap between the bottom percentage earners of degree seekers? So that is people like teachers, anyone who um, pursues a degree in the arts, so that be music, art, some of those things, and some of the bottom or middle percentage earners of those who don't get a degree. Maybe someone who goes to trade school, someone a plumber, electrician, a mechanic. Some of these. How do we? Do you think that free college is something that's going to start to eliminate that gap?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, with the ability to access, what this is doing is it's allowing, like you said, since this is a scholarship, it's allowing those who are hardworking and potentially in financially hard situations. Uh, for example, immigrants. This is going to be a great opportunity for them. I happen to know a few people who immigrated, their parents immigrated into this country, and they were not able to pay for college, due to the fact that their family just moved here. And I think that what this is going to do is it's going to allow the not necessarily overachieving, but achieving students who might not necessarily have the ability to go to college, to pursue that. I think that also goes back to people who are helping to provide for their family potentially. And school might necessarily not be a priority. This takes kind of some of that financial strain off of that as well, and it's just going to help more people get into that workforce, and into some of those more higher paying jobs and help support families. Real quick, just Googled this. So the difference between a high school diploma and a bachelor's degree in the U.S. Is on average about $28,000 a year in medium household income difference. So that's a significant amount.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about this wage gap, I think $28,000 sounds like a lot, but I think, and it is a lot. I'm not here to say that I could pull $28,000 out of my pocket and put a down payment on a car. in 20 minutes if I wanted to, because I can't. Um, but I think when we talk about this pay gap, I think it's important to understand that there, I don't want to say misconception, but I'll say myth for lack of a better word, about this college degree just meaning an endless flow of money. There's a lot of benefits, opportunities come your way from a college degree, but it's not the only way to be successful in America. And people have often said that's what makes America America. You are able to start a business right out of high school. You can go to trade school. You can go to the military. And I think the military is what makes this the most interesting because America spends so much on its military more than any other country by a long shot. So I think this wage gap here happens because the people on the lowest end of the degree seeking students are seeking a certain degree. They are seeking what I'm going to coin, maybe not coin, but say is a passion degree. So somebody who has a passion for music and wants to make it their lifestyle is not setting themselves up for a lifestyle of vacations to Turks and Caicos every weekend. That's just not how it works. Whereas some of these people who don't make it to college are working just the best job they can get sometimes. So I think that this pay gap here, I don't know if there's a study that's been done on this, but is what's the number that's between the highest earners of those who don't ever go to college and to those who earn a college degree that's not passion? Um, Obviously there are people who are going to pursue a degree in engineering or architecture because that's what they have a passion for. But I'm strictly here talking about these things that need a degree. You need a degree to be a teacher, to get a license in at least the state of Colorado to have a licensure to teach a subject in high school. You need a bachelor's for that, or a certain other qualifiers, but a bachelor is pretty much the easiest one. So some of these low paying college degree requirement jobs are something people want to go into. So I'm interested how you think that shifts this pay gap here. Is it really that $28,000 that we see?
I think that'll be interesting to see. And New Mexico is going to be kind of a petri dish for this in a way. I think right now, when it comes to economics, I understand a limited amount, so I don't think that I can say necessarily what exactly it's going to do, hence the name Unqualified. Um, but uh, I like I've said repeatedly, I don't think more education is a bad thing. What I think that we're going to see is like you said, some of the lower end um, college requirement jobs, so those that require a bachelor's degree. I think that that's going to become more competitive. Um, that's something that you're going to see. The thing about competition, though, is when there is high competition, people are going to take pay cuts um, to seem more appealing to an employer. And that might kind of lead to some of what you're talking about, like this almost devaluation of a college degree. Um, and it, what what is really going to be telling in all of this is how many people actually end up getting the scholarship. If it's something that is given out like candy on Halloween, I think you definitely see some big effects. If it is not, if it's a relatively mutually exclusive uh, scholarship for those who are high achieving students and it's going to pay, I think what you're doing, or pay for some of their schooling, it's going to help those high achieving students achieve even more. Um, so I think that it's time will tell all, and it's really hard to say right now. Like I said, not an expert on economics by any means, but I think we will see some sort of effects.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point about how many people get it, and we can point out here that the funding for this bill is $75 million, which is almost 1% of the state's overall budget at 8.5 billion. But $75 million is still a lot of money. I mean, that's a lot of college scholarships that are going to be paid for there. But again, there's these certain criterion that have to be met. So it's only New Mexico citizens. Although it is a very inclusive bill, so prison inmates get free tuition here if they can meet the scholarship. Unauthorized immigrants, which I think is really interesting, also can meet the scholarship and um, get free tuition. And again, as I stated in the intro here, Native Americans whose nations kind of extend their boundaries into another state. So the Navajo in Arizona could be considered a New Mexico resident for the purpose of tuition. So I think this is to some extent going to be a fairly large amount of people that are able to get this scholarship. And Governor Grisham, I'm not sure how to say that, but she was quoted saying that New Mexico has more education resources than any state in the nation. So I think it kind of makes sense that New Mexico is the state to try this, be this petri dish, this guinea pig that we're just gonna have to wait and see. Like you said, I think it's very similar to the weed experiment in Colorado and Oregon, which was actually just passed in Congress to make weed uh, either decriminalized or legal.
Right.
I'm not exactly certain which one it is, but New Mexico has been a leader in educational rights. But I think it's important here to realize that some other states are doing this. Maybe not states, but universities or states. The University of Texas created a $300 million endowment in February that's able to expand tuition assistance to thousands of students, so not free tuition, but makes it significantly cheaper. Students in Michigan who are residents and were essential workers during the pandemic are getting free college.
And of
Um,
course, sorry to jump in real quick here.
oh,
Of
you're good.
course, we have the here in Colorado, we have the Colorado Opportunity Fund as well, which makes in-state tuition here cheaper for those residents. So similar program, but go ahead.
Yeah, and specific with Michigan, you have to be an essential worker during the pandemic, and it's covering free college to residents who are essential workers, and it also covers tuition at community colleges for people 25 years and older. So this isn't necessarily a new idea that's been thrown around. The governor of New Mexico introduced this idea in 2019, but it was halted because of the pandemic. It's been something that's thrown around for a while. President Biden made it a cornerstone of his campaign. But this is the first legislation to really make college free, and something that's really interesting. And I want to get your opinion on if free college does it work? Like we kind of touched on this a little bit, like this idea of getting more education. But are people going to use this the way we think they will?
I think people are absolutely going to use this the way that we think that we will. I think it's going to create a lot of opportunities. Now, you're going to have people that abuse it in some way. That's just going to happen with anything. What I'm more concerned about, I work for the government, and I have seen firsthand government programs. They can be an absolute mess. And when we look at Obamacare here in the U.S., great idea on paper, but in reality, it was not as structured and organized and as well run as the commercialized healthcare, and I think that's a lot of the reason why it ended up somewhat falling apart and then eventually being repealed. I don't know if it was reinstated, um, but when we look at a government college program, I think to a certain extent, you do see the devaluation of the college degree, which we're already seeing here. in America. Now it's, oh, well, if you want a good paying job, you got to go to college and you got to get your bachelor's degree. And to a certain extent, I think getting more people into the educational field and getting more people's degrees is a good thing, especially when we look at Wyoming here, because Wyoming has a population of only about 500,000 people. Um, really, very small state, so they need all the educated people that they can get. Um, they're not a LA or Miami where they're attracting foreign people who want to come and move there and help make the city a better place. It's Wyoming. It's the middle of America. Not that many people live there.
No hate to Wyoming. I personally love the place.
And yeah, no hate to Wyoming whatsoever. Want to throw that out there. Colorado's not super big either. But there is more value in that because of how on its smaller scale, in my opinion. When we look at America as a whole, I think that we might see that it's not as valuable, it's not as used, it could be potentially abused. The other thing too, $75 million is not a large amount when we talk about state or national revenue. Now, if we're talking a program that encompasses the 350 million or so Americans that live in the U.S., that's going to be a lot more money than the 75 million that we're putting aside for 500,000 people here in Wyoming. Um, I think personally, the way that you kind of address some of these issues is you need to do it on a smaller scale level. So I think that we're not going to ever see a national program for free college. I think that the solution here is actually to keep this on a state level and let it go state by state, um, and allow them to regulate more of the free college, discounted college, assisted college programs to help with some of the issues that I think we would see on a national level.
Yeah, I think the cost here, I mean, with anything, you have to look at the cost pragmatically. Money is, it's unfortunately the most important part of this bill. When you look at this through a practical standpoint, somebody might say, this is absolutely the wrong idea. It's going to cost way, way too much. But I think this is one of those situations where the means justify the end, in the sense that, yes, we're going to be paying an incredible amount of money to send people to college for free. But I think if we believe in our college system and we believe that it works, I think it's something that we should absolutely do. Which, in my mind, brings up the most interesting argument against free college, and that's simply that it's supporting a system that doesn't support everyone. It's something that could be called subpar. Um, when we look at an article on Forbes written by Michael Horn, he says that financial hardship is one of the reasons people leave school, but it's not the top reason. The what he says is the top reason is life balance. It's juggling responsibilities. Excuse me, outside of college is a more significant reason students leave. And it becomes harder for a student to keep their life in balance the longer a program runs. So there's an argument here to get away from traditional post secondary or traditional college that would be sense free. One of the other arguments that he makes here is that this is a program that's essentially going to help those who need it the least and not those who need it the most. So what essentially he's saying here is that free tuition sounds great on paper, but it doesn't move the needle in terms of completion. So he's making the argument here that, are you giving this money to people who aren't actually going to complete college? And that's why I think this New Mexico bill does a really good job at making it a scholarship, not a government program. And I think that's something when we talk about this that needs to kind of stay at the forefront of our mind is that this is something that students have to apply for, they have to get it, and they have to stay engaged in the program. They can't just sit in their college dorm and get drunk every Friday reaping the benefits of this program because if their GPA falls below a 2.5, they're no longer eligible to get that program renewed. And one of the other things that goes with this is it has to comply with other rules promulgated by the department to carry out the provisions of the Opportunities Scholarship Act. I don't personally know what those are. That's coming directly from the bill. I'd assume if you dug into it deeper, you could figure out those rules. But again, this is not just giving these students the money. So I think the best argument against this is, do we believe in our college system?
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in here. As a college student, I would definitely say no. I don't. I am technically in my second year of college here, and I say technically because, pandemic and all that. Don't want to get into it. But I have taken a lot of college classes that aren't very helpful, and some are already classes I've taken in high school. And a lot of these the classes that you take, and even my own academic advisor advisor has told me this. Um, you just have to take the classes to get them out of the way, so you can check a box on a paper to say, oh, this is how I did my degree. So a lot of college is a money grab in that way. And I do like how this is kind of the government, in a way, supporting high achieving students through some of this. But to talk about your point of saying that this is helping the people that need to be helped the least, I think that's a really good view on it. You know, high achieving students already are typically the people who are pursuing secondary education and also applying for the most scholarships. Are those that are driven and trying to work through school, and they have an end goal in mind. A lot of people go into college without even an end goal in mind. They say, I want to get a degree, and then they're 2 years into their degree, and they still don't have a degree picked. Um, so I do see to a certain extent how this is, right. I like the devil's advocate lens on this to a certain extent because some of these kids aren't going to need the help. Now, to play devil's advocate for the devil's advocate, those people who are the highest achieving students who are qualifying for the scholarship are also more than likely going to the major universities. I know Wyoming is Wyoming University, University of Wyoming, not Wyoming University. Major college. So they do have major colleges in Wyoming. And those are also going to be the most expensive colleges as well. And you do have to have higher GPA requirements and other things to get into some of these schools. So I do see some benefit to this, but what I would like to know is for your average student, and I say average tentatively because it's probably not the average national, but a C student, right? 2.0 GPA, scraped their way through high school. They decide they want to go to college. Maybe not super driven at the time, maybe not the most academically achieving person. Those are the people that can need the most help in college, or those that are financially struggling, like you mentioned, that life school balance. If you're trying to move out, property expenses have gone up like crazy in the States lately. If you have a family, if you are trying to provide for children, these are all circumstances, and I think that'll help with some of those things as well. Because a lot of reason I think people stop going to school is the money aspect of it. So I think it'll help some people complete the degree. But overall, it's kind of hard to say whether this is a good overall or a bad overall. Like I've said before, petri dish. We're really kind of gonna just find out. It's trial by fire. There's never been. I don't want to say never been, but this is a larger scale scholarship opportunity than a lot of other states that have done this. Um, so it's hard to say. And like I mentioned, with our Colorado Opportunity Fund here, I don't have to do anything to qualify that for that. All I have to do is live in Colorado. So there is a lot of difference to that and this. I do like the fact that like you said, this isn't a government program. This is a scholarship. And that it's good to make that distinction because it's not giving away free college. It is a government scholarship. So it's tax money that is set aside, or some kind of revenue um, that is set aside, dedicated to secondary students, which is something that I don't hate. Um, Another quick side note when it comes to Wyoming, the gross government revenue for the year of 2019 was $1.2 billion. So this is a $75 million program. That's not that much when it comes to the overall spending. And I know people with all of these government programs, they say, oh, well, I don't want my tax dollars going there. Like, I don't want my tax dollars paying for somebody else's education. This is a relatively minuscule government project in the grand scheme of things. Now, for most states, it's not going to be that way. If you do it for California, it's not going to be that way because California has a massive population. Um, but that's why I think that this experiment might work a little bit better in Wyoming than it is other places because of the low impact cost when it comes to the overall government revenue and budget. Um, might not be a terrible program in the long run, but we're just gonna have to see.
Yeah, and I think one of the things with this, I kind of want to go back to this is, do we believe in our college system? Because you and I have very different views on an education. I am speaking as a future history teacher, um, assuming I finish college. um, One of the things here is that I think there's a large misconception about the American education system, and I think it could. I think America has a unique stance on education. I think it is, in theory, one of the better education systems in the world. However, in practice, we see that that's not true. And me speaking personally here, I think that has a large part to do with the US being a country that has always built itself off the pick yourself up from your bootstraps mentality. When we look at countries who are very highly educated, or maybe not so much that, but you always see kind of towards the top in mathematics, English rankings. One of the ones that come to mind for me are countries like Australia, Thailand, countries where schooling is a part of their culture. It is something that these kids, they grow up in with the purpose essentially to go to school, where in America that's just simply not true. And I don't know if I'm ready to call that a cultural problem, but maybe a cultural misconception about school. And I think what I want to point out here is I have a couple tabs up on my computer here. One of them is the most educated countries in 2022, um, by percentage of upper secondary education. Now, what this means is this is percentage of people who have a secondary education. So below upper secondary would essentially be our high school. Upper secondary would be a bachelor's degree, and then tertiary would be master's, doctorates, anything like this. The first one that pops up is the Czech Republic, with 69.2% of their citizens being upper secondary educated. They offer free tuition for citizens. International students are also given the opportunity for free classes, but they're all taught in the Czech language. Classes taught in other languages are not free, which I think is pretty interesting. It's pretty common for countries that offer free tuition to international students that they teach it in their home language. Brazil does this as well in Portuguese, but again, Czech Republic's number one. They have free. Slovakia is number two. They do not have free college. Poland, Hungary, and Germany round out the number five. Germany does have free college. They are the only Germany and Poland are the only other two that have it. So out of the top five, we're looking at three of five having free education. That being again Czech Republic, Poland, and Germany. If we go all the way to the top 10, that's Slovenia, Latvia, Austria, Lithuania, and Estonia. Estonia being at 48.4% of upper secondary education, so this is now dipping below the 50% mark.
I'm curious,
But as
where does the
go ahead.
U.S. sit on that list?
I am getting there. Slovenia has free college or free tuition. Switzerland, interestingly, does not. I would have assumed Switzerland does, um, but obviously they don't. Estonia, Lithuania, they also do not. Latvia, Austria, they do not. United States is at 41.7%, which is, I believe, it doesn't give me numbers, it just lists them all. I
And you
believe
said
that's
that was what?
18th.
18th.
18th at 41.7%. Notable countries below us. Japan, I think it's interesting to point out here. Japan has no data on secondary. They do have 52.7% have a tertiary, um, but they just have zero data apparently. So I guess people in Japan just get masters. Um, guess that's how it works. But notable countries below the U.S. are Mexico, 22%, Spain, 23%, the United Kingdom, 32%, Australia, 34%, Brazil, 36%, Russia, 38%, Sweden, 39%. So the U.S. is kind of middle of the road, but upper secondary, and I don't necessarily think there's a correlation between countries who offer free tuition and higher education rates. So I think that argument about helping those who need it the least kind of holds some ground here. It doesn't really move the needle um, on college completion. Turkey at a low 19.7% offers free tuition for their citizens. So I think that's an interesting counter argument, one that holds a lot of ground.
Yeah, and it goes back to the fact that every country is going to do this in their own way. Um, when we talk about, you know, programs, it might not always look like a scholarship, so and it's also going to depend on your education's want to actually get an education. That's a big part of this. We do. I would say for the most part, when we're talking about culture, I think that there is a significant amount of emphasis on education. But when we look at the United States here, what makes it different, at least from my experience, is the amount of options you have. I got to speak to military recruiters in high school. I spoke to trade school representatives. I spoke to college representatives. So there's there's a lot of options that you can take. And here in the U.S., you do not necessarily have to have a degree to succeed, and there's been numerous people that have proved that. Um, so, and not to necessarily speak on other countries, I am unqualified, but you know, their education system and their economic system might be set up to where it's more like in the Czech Republic, where you have 70% of people who have, or close to 70% of people who have a bachelor's degree. Their system might be more set up there to where it's you need a bachelor's degree to be successful, and that is the only way to do it. You know, there's other cultural, there's other economic things that do impact this when we talk about college, and there's no set in stone answer for if anything is going to work. Like you said, with Turkey, great example. You know, Turkey's a Western economic powerhouse, regional powerhouse, large population, a lot of cultural influence, not super high
Just to
education rate.
interrupt real quickly, obviously you failed geography. Turkey's an eastern country, but continue.
No, no, well, Turkey's a NATO. I'm gonna call it
They
the
are.
closest Western Eastern country, but you know what? We'll save that argument for another day.
We are unqualified.
We are unqualified. I don't know geography, apparently. The more you know. Um, but you know, education overall is still important. I think you do have to have some sort of culture surrounding. Okay, we want you to be educated, and the benefit system also needs to be set up to incentivize people to do it. If you see no point to getting a college education, you're not going to. So, you know, some people might not take advantage of the program for that exact reason. But it's all going to depend on the individual person. It'll depend on the individual climate. And like I said, I don't think that anything like this here in the United States is ever implemented on a nationwide level. I think this will be local, it'll be states, and it's going to look different in every state.
Yeah, and I think one of the arguments for that is the money aspect. You look at European countries in the European Union. Sales tax for most of them is 20%. So heavy taxes over there. The countries that offer free college, the lowest tax there is Norway at 36.2%. Germany is just under 50%, being the highest.
Wow.
Norway being the lowest. So a lot of that over, lots of
A lot of
a lot of
lot of lot
taxes
of
you
lot
gotta.
of taxes overseas. Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah,
especially here in the U.S. I mean, we have some states that still don't even have sales tax on things. You can go to like I believe Montana doesn't have any sales tax. You can go to Montana and you can buy a candy bar for 1.99 and it will be 1.99. Like it won't be anything less than that or anything
yeah,
more than
and
that.
I think it's important to point out though that some of the way this works is a little bit skewed. So Germany is paying just under 50% sales tax, right? When we look at medium income in Germany, it's 16,845 US dollars. Now that seems incredibly low compared to US. However, the cost of living in Germany, $12,024. So when we talk about all of this, it, it it's on a proportional scale. We can't, and I think Americans are good at this, but we relate everything possible back to America. Does it compete with America's standards? Well, Germany, free college, high medium income, low cost of living. And I think that's something that's really interesting, especially here in Colorado. We're looking at low medium income, high cost of living.
Yeah,
So maybe free college is something that starts to reverse that trend.
and some of the things that complicate that is because the U.S. is such a dynamic economic powerhouse. You know, all of our states here have individual little microeconomies that interact with each other internally, and things like that. So, you know, state to state, things can look different here, and that's going to affect your overall education rate and things like that too. Because you know, like you said, right now, what we're experiencing here in Colorado, very high cost of living. Wages have not kept up, and we're still on the low to medium end, I think is a good way to put it. But in other places across the country, it's not the same. Not everybody is experiencing this housing crisis like we are here in Colorado. Now, I would say that as a general trend right now, housing and living costs are going up in the United States. But some states are weathering that better than others just because of the way that the economies interact with each other and interact with the national market. There's so many different levels to understanding how this kind of all impacts our education system, and it goes back to college, right? If you have a low cost of living, more people are going to be able to go to college because they have money to spend on things. So they can more comfortably feel like they can go and get an education to earn more. Or, on the flip side, they might not want to go get an education because the cost of living is low. So they're like, oh, screw it. I can pay for everything. I just bought a new car because my rent is a third of my income. So I can go buy nice things and I don't have to get a college education. There's a lot of like small little variables that play into all of these things for every person. And it comes down to the fact that college is an individual decision. It's not forced upon anybody, and that you have so many other options and so many other careers that you can pursue even without a degree that to a certain point some people don't see the point in getting one whatsoever. So, especially here in the United States, like I know you mentioned, we Americans love relating everything back to the United States. But our economic climate here is significantly more complicated sometimes than a lot of other countries because it's not as so much of a unified single economy as it is a bunch of little microeconomies that all interact with each other sometimes.
Yeah, and I think when we to go back to the international here, Germany again, almost 50% sales tax, offers free tuition for citizens as well as international students. So German citizens are paying for anyone who wants to go to college there. We look at the Czech Republic, free tuition for citizens, also for international, but all classes are taught in Czech. They have the lowest sales tax of all of the countries who offer free tuition at almost 40%, 36.2. Excuse me, Norway being the lowest, 36.2. Czech Republic being somewhere in the middle when we look at, again, annual income in Czech Republic, 26,664 a year. Again, America seems low. Cost of living there at the highest, $750 a month, which is 9,000 a year. So these people are making an incredible amount of money. Czech Republic is considered to be one of the more affordable places to live. Quickly, you can look at Norway, somewhere that costs on the high end about $4,300. Cost of living, annual average annual income there is almost $55,000. Again, that's the lowest sales tax, 36.2. So you can see that these countries who offer these free college tuition have high living standards. It doesn't cost a lot, making people happy if it doesn't cost a lot. Um, Norway and Czech Republic are considered second world countries. Um, Probably not the worst thing if you're making $55,000 a year and only having to spend about 4.3 to just be alive. In Norway, Germany being the first world country, obviously. So I think that this guinea pig of a bill opens so many possibilities for what the standard of living is in America. What our quality of life is. Does our quality of life go up? Does our economy inflate? Does it improve? Is it going to get worse? And I think these are there's so many questions that are opened by this bill that are going to be like you said, wait and see
Wait and
what
see.
happens.
Right. And another thing that plays into this too is, the American Revolution, part of why it happened was high tax rates. Americans are not very fond of a lot of taxes.
especially
So
when we're not represented in them.
yeah, absolutely. And if there's any kind of tea around. But there's a certain level of domestic unpopularity too, and that's part of the reason why some of these programs haven't been as widely implemented as they have in some of these other European countries that you're talking about. Is it's hard to find the revenue for this when we got a lot of things to pay for. You look at too Norway, Germany, some of these other countries, their military spending compared to ours is also significantly lower. And that's a good portion of our government funds every year go to our defense fund. It's hard to allocate resources when you have to do things for defense. And there was a day where gunboat diplomacy was, uh, like Teddy Roosevelt says, speak softly and carry big stick. You got to have a big military so you can have big trade. That's becoming less of a trend now, and the U.S. is definitely behind on that curve, in my opinion. But you know, there's also a lot of other things that the government allocates money to, and the education system, to a certain extent, is somewhat neglected here, in the grand scheme of things, and it's hard to come up with the money to do some of these programs as well. The only way you're going to be able to do that is raising taxes,
Yeah,
and
and I think,
people hate that here. It's
yeah,
hard to push through a bill when it's unpopular with people. And it's definitely more of a norm, I would say, in European countries to have high taxes. Like you're saying, we're talking about 20, 30, potentially 50% sales tax. I mean, anything over 10% is relatively unheard of here in the States. Um, so there is that element to it as well. But just another one of those small little things that plays into kind of all of these different things that affect the education system.
yeah, and I think one of the things with that is first the way the American government is set up and the efficiency of it and the efficiency of Congress, which is a four episode podcast. If we really wanted to, couple day long episode podcast, if we really wanted to get into it. I mean, I am studying history and have taken 4 classes on the American government. Mind you, I'm in my second semester, so I think there's a lot to be said about the complexity of the U.S. government, but it also spans over an incredible amount of space and people. You look at the population of America, we are 500,000 away from 330 million people. That was taken in 2020. I would be willing to bet we are darn close to 334 5 million people um, today. And that's a lot of people. You look at Norway in 2020, barely 5.5 million. Small country, but you talk about spending on military. Well, Norway's not going to spend as much on the military because it's not as big. They're also protected by these big militaries like the U.S. Maybe not Norway specifically, but Norway geographically is in a pretty good spot. Somebody's got to go through Finland and Sweden to get there, and I'm not going to be here to say I'm not going to stand here and say you could do that in 2 days. Um, so I think some of this just has to do with the situation countries are in. America is an incredibly diverse country, maybe the most diverse country. We have so many perspectives, opinions, everything coming in. Of course, it's hard for Congress to pass anything that makes everyone happy. Or a country like Norway, it's super far north. I don't want to be racist, but I can't imagine their population of African Norwegians is incredibly high proportionate to the African Americans. So I think there's a large thing to be said here about the US's diversity and how that affects what happens in and outside of the education world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that diversity is going to affect any kind of decision making. And like you said, I mean, I don't know what the ethnic diversity of Norway is, but I mean, America is typically known as the center of kind of multiculturalism and like this mismatch of everyone, and it does make the decision making process a little bit harder. When it relates to education, that could be potentially certain racial groups or certain geographic areas don't have as much access to public education or good public education or good colleges or good college opportunities. There's a lot to be said on that. Like great example is the Chicago school system, which is notorious for being pretty bad. Speaking on just things that have happened recently, I mean, the Denver Public Schools has been under a lot of scrutiny here in Colorado as well. There was a lot of big events surrounding that within the past few years when we're talking about education. Um, and I don't want to bleed over into pre-secondary education, but when we talk about diversity, it is important to remember that it does affect that decision making process, and it does, it helps and hurts to push things through when you have a lot of diversity. When we talk about America specifically, um, you know, part of the reason that we started this podcast is because of how polarized everything is when it comes to politics right now. People don't sit down and just have a conversation anymore. It's I agree, or I think this is what I stand on. I don't move at all. So, there's a lot of disagreement, especially when it comes to American politics, and that's one of the downsides to diversity, in my opinion. But that's not what we're getting into here. That's also going to impact your education system, and like you said, with Norway being a small country, we've seen that these college programs can be very, very effective on a small scale. And to reiterate the point that I've brought up multiple times throughout this video, I think that this is going to be implemented on a statewide level, never a nationwide level. And it's for exactly that reason. These programs work better on a small scale. So I think that, especially in Wyoming with half a million population, we might see that there is a lot of benefit out of this. We might see that cost of living drop and the wage increase and all of those things that are going to help this thrive. The other thing to kind of consider when we talk about America, though, with states and different climates in each state, is domestic immigration, right? We have the ability to just move up, pick up, and move to another state the next day if we want to. And that's also going to impact some of this process. If Wyoming starts this program and it's great, people are going to start moving to Wyoming. And it says all you have to do is to be a resident, which I'm going off of, I believe, the Colorado residency is you just have to live here for 5 to 10 years or so before you become a Colorado resident. So people might start moving to these areas too, um, to for the programs. There could be upsides and downsides to that. Like I said, more access to education, never a bad thing. But it might also cause some of these better programs in these small states to kind of get overrun by people, and I can see that you can have somewhat of a downfall with that as well.
Yeah, and I think as far as the qualification to be a New Mexico resident, it's 12-month consecutive presence.
Right.
So
That's
pretty,
that's 1 year. That's not a long
yeah,
time.
pretty short in New Mexico. So I think you're right. And just to kind of finish up here, two things. First of all, the demographics of Norway, because I'm interested in it. 83.2% are Norwegian, 8.3% are other European, and then 8.5% it just says other. That is the rest of the world outside of Europe makes up 8.5% of Norway.
Right.
So it's an incredibly ethnic and historical land. It's not nearly as diverse as a country like America. So I think a lot of what you were just saying just rings really true. But I think what I want to end here is just going back to the original bill saying it's a scholarship. This is not. I think you're right. I think federally it's going to be incredibly hard to do as a program unless it maintains scholarship level. But I think it has to be state level. It has to be. I think there could maybe be different requirements within each state. If a state like New York has more academically rigorous schools, where maybe 6 credit hours, isn't the normal. Where maybe a normal part-time student is taking 12 hours. I don't know if that's true, but just if a normal part-time student takes 12 hours, maybe you don't want to pay for everyone who's only going to be taking half of that. So I think a lot of this is going to be pretty guinea pig. And does it work? Does it not work? We probably won't know. We're not going to know for a while. This was signed very recently.
Very recently.
Signed.
I believe you said last Friday, correct?
Yes, last. Let's see.
So 4 days ago at this point.
Um, I believe so. The Friday, yeah, this most recent Friday. Today is April 6th. So it's something that maybe it's worth a revisit in a couple years to see what are the effects. What happened here?
What happened here?
So it'll be interesting.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Well, I think that's going to do it for today, guys. We hit our hour here, so normally try to cut it off right about here. So thank you for tuning into the podcast. I do appreciate it. Um, as always, just leave a comment down if you found this interesting. We would love any kind of feedback that we can get from you guys, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Anything else from you, Corey?
stay unqualified.
Stay unqualified.